Hello and welcome to Behind the Screens Episode 1, How to Make a Paladin. Tonight, I am your host, and I will be joined by Taylor, aka Recmus, a lovely player from Flavored Enemy, also DM of Myth, Might, and Magic. Thank you for joining me, Taylor.
It's so great to be here. I'm really honored. Should I do this, radio voice for the entire time, or?
Hey, whatever floats your boat, buddy.
But no, it is honestly great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. You were definitely one of the first people I had in mind when Paladin was chosen by our lovely listeners to be the first class that we talk about. I love the Paladin class. I think it's a lot more versatile than people give it credit for in terms of RP and creation. And hopefully we can illuminate that for some people, because I know a lot of people look at Paladin in the old light as the lawful good religious stick in the mud, that ruins fun at the table, and that is 100% not what it is anymore.
Certainly, and even if that's the kind of character you want to be, like, there's a lot better ways to do that now. Like, like, there's nothing wrong with a Paragon character, but there is definitely something wrong with a stick in the mud who polices all the other characters. Like, that's not fun.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you played one of the most Paragon characters that I've played with in a long time, in Quincy. Like,
yes, thank you.
Just a good person that's always trying to do the right thing, but understood, like, hey, sometimes, like, you don't have to bend the rules, but sometimes you got to get your hands a little dirty dealing with people.
Yes, certainly. Like, there's, Quincy was a character that is, definitely in the spirit of, like, the, old lawful good paladins, even though he was a fighter and eventually cleric, which is technically what a paladin is. Oh my gosh, Quincy is just
Quincy's just a paladin without being a paladin.
Yeah, he's an IKEA paladin.
He's just an IKEA paladin. Yeah.
I put it together myself.
But that kind of gets me on to my first subject that I want to talk about, is how choosing a background can kind of set the tone for your paladin early on. Because one of the things that I love doing is taking a non-traditional paladin, because obviously something like, your City Watch or your Acolyte or Cloistered Scholar, somebody that studied religion or studied something or was an active soldier that then, found religion or whatever, is a very, very common and very easy. Not to say it's bad, but it is it's a very easy to, okay, I just want to build a paladin. We're doing like a 2-shot or like a 4-episode thing. I don't want to put a lot of thought into it. It's very easy. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I love doing is something like a smuggler or an urchin character, and then, like, say they get caught, and then, like, they serve their time or they pay their fine or whatever, and then they've taken the oath of redemption and are seeking to do better now.
Yes, definitely you can go very versatile in terms of your background as far as adventuring goes, and that is always a very interesting angle with, to give them a kind of criminal or, like, ne'er-do-well background, because it means that, like, both as a player, you get to play this, like, interesting person who's trying to make amends for their past, but also as a DM, you can always bring up people from their past who are trying to pull them in different directions. Like, oh hey, maybe your, gutter snipe buddy who got away when you were caught finds you again, and he's like, hey, I got a job, I got a sure thing lined up for you, and it's like,
it tries to pull you back into that life.
Yes.
Yeah. That's very good. Like, and DMs, please listen to that. Include your characters, all of your players.
Yes.
Try to include something from their backstory. And it doesn't necessarily have to be their backstory. It could just be something, like Taylor just said, like their background of, like, hey, they were an urchin or they were a criminal. Okay, were they part of a criminal organization? Were they, like, on their own? Do they have, if they were, like, a career criminal, do they have history with maybe like the City Watch, and now the party is like trying to work with the City Watch, but now they're hesitant because they like some of the soldiers know like, hey, there's a known former criminal with this group. Like a lot of things can interact very differently than just like, oh, hey, we were hired by the City Watch. They don't care really what we do. We're gonna do this. And whereas they might now be looking at your actions extra harshly and be like, oh man, if you don't do it by the book like we really want you to, then we're either not going to pay you or we might throw you in jail. They might be quicker to throw you in jail.
Yeah,
even
certainly. It adds a different dimension to the whole thing. And as far as like I was scrolling through the backgrounds and just trying to think of like different interesting twists that you can do on them. So the three that I think come to mind as far as like interesting directions you could take a paladin, or four, I guess. Touching very briefly on like the very classic like almost kind of hermit background, or like you're a religious acolyte. I think one of the interesting angles you could pull with that is someone who was planning to like stay in their monastery and then suddenly they are called to go somewhere else, because there's always that because I think that creates an interesting tension between like the paladin and their deity or the source of their power, because it's like,
yeah, like I didn't want to be here. Like I didn't want to do this with my life. I kind of just wanted to copy manuscripts.
Yeah, I was fully down for copying manuscripts and cleaning the monastery, and now I gotta go fight goblins?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly can kind of give you that big, like, that flip of like, look, I was living a peaceful life. I don't want to be, and that I always love characters and players that are capable of playing that type of character that doesn't want to be there, but is still like, they don't actively try to like leave the table. I was like, they still want to play, but they have that balance of and it is a very tightrope to walk.
It's the reluctant hero, but like you have to underline the hero part. You don't underline the reluctant. Yes, you need to make sure they play into that, because they're like, I don't want to be here, but I'm here, so I guess I gotta do the hero thing. Is the attitude to have about it. You're not just like, I'm not gonna go on the adventure. I'm gonna sit here in the tavern and drink. It's like, that sucks.
Yeah, please don't be that kid. Please don't be that player. Please don't be that player.
Another interesting, just sort of different angle that you can take, that I was looking through, is the athlete background. Because then if you mix that with like the right subclass, like for example the Oath of Glory, then basically you're like Disney's Hercules.
That is one. So the Oath of Glory is my favorite oath.
Oh, really?
For paladins, and I love combining it with something like the Entertainer or the especially the Gladiator variation of that, and just like somebody who just wanted to be like a world-renowned like pit fighter or something like they weren't like a criminal. They actively chose to be a gladiator and like just want to be well known, because then it's just like you can really play into that, like you said, almost that Hercules type of thing where it's like, I just want to be the best at this. That is one thing that I do love about 5e, and for those listening, we're going to use 5e a lot because that's what we play in Flavored Enemy. Obviously, you can use similar themes amongst any of your Pathfinder or any other games that you're going to play. But the way that 5e does Paladins now is they're no longer tied to religion. They're just tied to the oath. So you don't necessarily have to worship a deity. And that I think was one of the best decisions they made, because it does allow for this much more flexible type of Paladin where you're not bound by religious tenets. You can do something like you said, be an athlete who is just like, I want to be amazing, and because they're taking this oath and they take it so seriously, they kind of accidentally become a paladin. In a way,
because they're just
like, they didn't mean to be a paladin, but they just wanted to be really, really good at. Because I mean, some of the things that they talk about for athletes is like being a marathon runner or being a chariot racer. Like, you're not actively fighting somebody; you're just really good at running.
Imagine
but
the world.
because you take an
Imagine
oath
being
to.
one of the best Olympic sprinters in the world, and then suddenly you hit
Yeah.
something with a weapon, and holy light explodes whatever you hit.
Yeah. Like imagine you're watching the Olympic and Usain Bolt just like smashes the Olympic record and the world record, and he goes like high fives his teammate, and all of a sudden there's just this spark of divine light, and the teammate just goes down.
Oh dear.
For
Oh
being
dear.
spiked.
Let's see.
But stuff like that is like super cool. Like I love that Wizards of the Coast. I don't congratulate Wizards of the Coast a lot because there are a lot of problems with a lot of things they do. But taking the Paladin away from obviously you can still play into being a religious Paladin.
Yes.
You can 100% do that with probably any of these oaths. But not being forced to is such a nice
indeed
touch.
because certainly also in like a D&D world, like gods can mean very different things than like the popular Western ideal of like a divinity. Obviously, like there's
well, look at a race like the Koto or whatever, where like if they just believe something, like a lot like the Warhammer orcs, if they just believe in something enough, it becomes real.
Right.
So like if they just believe in an entity enough,
Yes.
it becomes a god. Like if they just like they can make travelers into gods just by believing that the adventurers are gods.
That is very, very weird to think about, but very, very interesting. The two other backgrounds that I kind of wanted to highlight, for the sake of interesting or unique paladins, one of them is the Faceless, the background that like gives you a secret identity, because even though I am a D&D nerd and an anime nerd and all these other kinds of nerd, at my heart I am a superhero nerd, and the idea of being a paladin with a secret because if you mix that with like Oath of Vengeance, you're basically Batman.
Yeah, you're basically just a vigilante
Batman
superhero.
who goes with divine smites. I will clean the city streets of these criminal filth.
And this is one thing that I want to put onto DMs. DMs, don't be afraid to mess with. I know this is technically mechanical, but I view it as flavor. Don't be afraid to mess with your paladin's smites a little bit, in terms of possibly changing the damage type. Like if you have a player that wants to be, like say, a faceless, Oath of Vengeance, paladin, be like, hey, how do you feel about possibly doing this type of damage or this type of damage instead of doing radiant damage?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be necrotic. It doesn't necessarily have to be necrotic, but it could be something like, how do you feel about doing cold damage? Because you're the icy hand of justice, or whatever.
Yes, whatever in theme that they want to do.
Whatever theme, like, because you say, it's basically superhero. Like, say your superhero has fire powers. Okay, your smites deal fire damage now. Like, you can really lean into that and like lean into the theme for your character, and that helps the player feel more like their character. Because now it's like, oh man, this isn't just stuff on a paper. This is something that's been customized and tweaked just for me.
Yeah, players certainly love it when you even make those minor changes that make them feel, uniquely their character. Because that's really what most people want when they play D&D, is to like be their character. Well, some, like I'd say that's certainly a section, not necessarily all.
Yeah. Not necessarily all, because some of us do play some just like character in Regnum Batisha.
Yes. As a minor note, I hope you don't mind that Sparrow doesn't like Thalia all that much.
I don't like Thalia all that much.
Okay, that's good.
I love her to death, but man, I would not be friends with this girl.
Yeah, to Sparrow, it's like, oh, you're a rich kid who gets away with whatever they want, regardless of. Yeah, so he does not like that at all. The last one that I wanted to highlight, and this was more for a personal note, is actually the pirate background. Specifically because the very first 5e character that I ever made was a well, originally they were a rogue fighter, but I wasn't having like fun with the fighter abilities at the time. Um, and so my DM let me switch all of my fighter levels for paladin levels, and I absolutely loved it. Like it was so satisfying to be a tiefling who could fly and hit people and then fly away and smite, and it was so glorious. His name was Roy Loxley, and I played him like this. I played him like this gentleman thief esque pirate man.
His last name's Loxley.
Yeah, he's a tiefling Robin Hood on the seas. You got it in one. He fought pirate lords, or in his backstory he did anyway, and he wants to steal from the rich and give to the poor, and that was kind of his whole paladin deal was.
And I love that you talk about being a tiefling paladin, because that's the next thing that I want to get into is unconventional races for paladins, because a lot of times people think of paladins as typically either like human or even like sometimes like half orc or bigger names. But like I love, especially again, D&D did a wonderful job, I think, of including so many different exotic and monstrous races into 5e that you can do so many specific things. Like obviously some of them lean into easier, I think honestly in my opinion the easiest one to lean into being, if you want to kind of still do like the radiant paladin thing, is the ASMR. They have the
the radiant soul,
soul or whatever. Protector sub race or whatever, which gets the radiant soul ability that leans into being radiant. And you can even do the same thing because they have the scourge and the fallen. That's like, okay, if you want to be like, maybe you start off as the protector, but then you're an oath of whatever devotion paladin, but then you break that oath. Also now you go from being a protector to being a fallen ASMR, and now instead of being an oath of devotion, now you're an oath breaker. So now it does, like, I feel like ASMR paladin is kind of like it gives you a lot of paths that you can choose from to mess with it, but you can do so many different things. Like one of my favorites, because we talked about like the different types of oaths not being religious anymore, like in Eladrin, these old ancient elves taking the oath of the ancients.
I do really like that idea as well. And a slight mechanical side note, I hope we're not doing too many of I don't mean to interject with too many of those, but if we're giving suggestions, two of the like major things with that are helpful for paladins are a way to close into melee distance and like ranged or area of effect options are like the two major limitations that a paladin has that your race can certainly help you sidestep or
because currently as it stands, paladins can still only smite in melee. I know one D&D is messing around
based on what I have
smites,
heard from the feedback they got and how they talked about it. I think they are also gonna pull back on the ranged smites. Yeah,
I think they're gonna get through it. Yeah, it's so powerful because especially with dexterity already being such a great stat to just dump into anyways, like. Making paladins be able to range smite I think you would just see a ton of dips into paladins and then just fight. Like I think you'd see like a 2 fighter for action surge, a 2 paladin for smites, and then something else to give them a bunch of spell slots to be able to smite with.
Yeah.
So I do worry about that, but I think some of the other cool ones, like you said, that give other things for people to do is like something like Minotaur, which if you take the dash action, so now you can move and then take the dash action, and then you can still use your horns as like a bonus action attack. So now you can kind of close that gap a little bit. Or like I said, something like an owl.
Yeah, flight certainly
that's capable of
that's
flight.
Why I went with a winged tiefling for Roy. I'm like, oh yeah, because I can fly up to people and then stab them and then fly away. It was a very hit and run. Yes.
Yeah, it really gives you that.
Centaur
extra.
might also be like a really good one because
The
you
other
have that
thing I
increased
like-
base speed.
Centaur's really good. Yes, I believe they're
Yes,
they're
40
40 base speed. Yeah, 40 base speed. Yeah, and then you take something like the mobile feat. Now all of a sudden you've got 50 feet of movement. You're closing that gap.
That is that's
extra quick.
A solid one. And like you mentioned before with Eladrin and Shatter Kai, their bonus action teleport also really helps. Huge.
Yeah. Like there's so many cool things that like people don't think of. Even something like the Heron Gun, which
oh yes,
they can they have the rabbit hop ability. They'll let you close that gap a little bit extra. And even if it's not closing the gap, something that will help you in the meantime of not dying with something like satyrs that get
the magic resistance.
Like the magic resistance.
Once you pair that with your aura of protection and your yes, you're basically
adding the bonuses to saving throws.
So invincible. Oh, and then you can make it even better or worse depending on the way you look at it by going Oath of Ancients and then at 7th level getting that aura that makes you resistant to spells. So it's like, wow, casting spells against you becomes useless because you have this huge bonus and advantage on all saving throws, and even if they do hit you, it barely does anything.
Yeah.
It's nuts. It's mean.
It's just nuts. It's like you have resistance to it. You have whatever your charisma is as a bonus to it, and then you have advantage on it. So it's just
and you're proficient with
disgusting.
Wisdom and charisma. So you're not
the other race. Yeah, which is phenomenal. Yeah, which is phenomenal stats to be at. One of the other great races that I like looking at is the Genasi and Genasi races because they all inherently get spells. Which one of the things that
yes, exactly.
Paladins don't get is cantrips. Paladins do not get cantrips.
It's a great way to like pick up a few cantrips that you're interested in, and I think
something like the fire Genasi gets produce flame, which now you have a light source and you have really a range attack option.
And I think the Earth Genasi gets like pass without trace once per long rest. So you can be
pass without trace.
So you can be your big stocky paladin that's also a little bit stealthy sometimes. Once a day at least.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're in plate armor, having a +10 to stealth, like that disadvantage, you're still gonna probably roll like a 15 or so, which if you're doing a group stealth check, like if you're
that's
paladin,
solid.
if your tank is rolling to 15, like chances are good the rest of the party is like you're not mad. I think the other really good, slightly obvious paladin choice is the half orc. For two things. The savage attack, letting you roll extra damage die because as a paladin you're wanting to smite on those crits anyway. So if you want
I
to
actually
kind of
played a half orc paladin. It was very good.
Yeah, lots of damage. And then obviously the other thing is the relentless endurance.
To just
say
no
once per long rest, being able to just
I think also like Dragonborn are another kind of obvious choice, but is solid mostly because their breath weapon gives them like a ranged area of effect.
Yeah, especially with the new Dragonborn being so much like with Fizbins. The new Dragonborn are so good.
And you can
the breath
use
weapon
it
is
more than
actually
once
helpful. Like, the breath weapon
for
is
short
actually
rest.
good. Yeah, and you can weave it into your. It's no longer just your action. It just replaces one of your attacks, if I remember correctly. So that is phenomenal. And then obviously you get all of the cool options. You get, your standard chromatics, your black, blue, green, red, white, your metallics, but then you also get access to the gems, so you can be resistant to psychic damage or thunder damage or force damage. You know, some of these weirder ones that you typically don't find. Like, even if you're, as you get later on, you can find magical items like a ring of fire or a ring of ice resistance, stuff like that.
No.
You're typically not going to find like a ring of psychic resistance. So, I think if you combine that, like being one of the more obscure, drugs, but make sure that fits in your DM's campaign. Don't just pick the race because it's, you're trying to min max. Like, okay, if I do this and I do this now, I'm resistant to, the damage that I know that the BBEG does. No, like, if you're playing in a world where it's one of those worlds like, oh, the dragons disappeared thousands of years ago, and the magic went along with it, don't play a dragon. Like, make sure that your character race choice fits within the campaign, and then also you're going to have fun. Like, if you're going to be spending a lot of time below ground, traveling through the Underdark, like if you're doing a
Out of the Abyss,
oh god,
or like Undermountain,
I remember the name of it, but the Undermountain stuff, or Out of the Abyss, or Dungeon of the Mad Mage stuff. Don't play an Aarakocra or an Owl.
Or at least
you're probably
not
not going to get a chance to fly
the way
that
you
often.
want, certainly.
Yeah. Like, obviously there's nothing stopping you from playing those, but just know that you're probably not going to get to use that ability. And, if you really want, like, obviously we're not going to tell anybody not to play something if they really want to play it, because that's the beauty of D&D and TTRPGs in general, is that you can play whatever bizarre combination.
Speaking of, someone in the chat did briefly mention Goblin Paladins, and I gotta say that is actually a really good combo. Yes, because it lets you add
especially
extra
with Fury
damage
of
to your
the Small.
already massive damage, and
which is
also
massive.
Nimble Escape can be very useful to disengage or dash when you really need to.
Yeah, it basically gives you the rogue disengage or hide as a bonus action. You also have the Fey Ancestry, which advantage on being charmed, with being a paladin, like I said, already having bonus.
Oh yeah.
Or already having proficiency in wisdom and charisma saves. You're pretty much impossible to charm. And with Mordenkainen, basically every you no longer have that 20 or 25 feet movement speed. Everybody has a 30-foot movement speed now.
Yeah.
Or more. 30 is now the base. So yeah, I think goblins are
always
absolutely
had 30
phenomenal.
feet. Like, they were just better than halflings. Yeah, and gnomes.
Yeah.
Oh, what a surprise.
They were just better than gnomes. Right? Yeah, halflings, yeah. That was the one thing that I so just like, because I wanted to play in, I think it's gnomes.
Yeah.
Actually, I think both of them have a 25 feet movement speed in the original. Yeah, both of them do. And I love, because I wanted to be I wanted to do something with halfling, and I was just like, but only having 25 feet of movement sucks.
There is some alleviation after, like, the 5th level of Paladin, because you get access to the spell Find Steed, which lets you summon a mount for yourself. And that also can be, like, a source of flavor for your Paladin, is flavoring, like, what kind of mount that you want, and...
Yes. Which does make more fun when you're a halfling or gnome, because you're small. You can have a medium-sized creature as a mount.
Yeah, like you could have a dog, for example, or
Yeah. Well, I remember in 4E, I had a phenomenal combination. I wasn't a paladin. I think I was a ranger with this character, but I was a goblin.
Oh.
And so I was small, and my mount was a blink dog. So yeah, I was just teleporting around with all these shenanigans.
That's a menace.
Don't post Goblin Slayer in our chat when we're having pro Goblin chat here.
If we're pro Goblin, then yes. If we're pro Goblin, then
somebody's post.
Well, I mean, I will say that, like, we are pro Goblin here. Anime specifically are very bad, but. It's
are terrible. Yes. Uh, but actually, that does bring me to a nice segue of DMs how to incorporate your character's odd choices into your campaign. If they want to play something like a goblin paladin, how are goblins viewed in the world? Like, say it's something like the Goblin Slayer world, where goblins are, or something similar, where it's kind of your more traditional Tolkien-esque fantasy, where like goblins, orcs are considered, quote unquote, evil races. Even though Wizards of the Coast has gotten away from that, people still like to play that. So, if you're playing that kind of world and somebody wants to be a goblin paladin that maybe breaks off from their tribe or whatever,
actually,
how would you go about trying to
this
DM
exact
that?
scenario actually came up in Myth, Magic, and Might as I was putting the world together, because I didn't really have a sense of goblins being this evil thing, but one of the characters, Priscilla, really wanted a Goblin Slayer background because they do happen to like that anime, and I was debating a little bit with myself as whether or not I wanted to go through with that, and I know that this isn't specific to Paladins, but I came up with the yes. So
It does help with DM world
so
building,
I
which is kind
eventually
of what
came
we're
up
here for
with
as
the
well.
idea of the accursed, which applies not just to goblins but also to elves and orcs, and and this idea that they are cursed into being evil, which I know sounds kind of very hand-wavy, but I also present the idea that in the past, when magic was a thing, people just cast remove curse on them, and then they'd go back to being whatever, they would go to being whatever they would have been had they not been born with this curse. So, and there are, folks born with that curse, but
Not
you
been
cast remove curse on them, and then suddenly it's I'm gonna go be a lawyer, and it's oh, that one's lawful evil.
That actually is one of my favorite backgrounds, though.
Yeah,
that
the
came in,
plaintiff.
Oh gosh, what is Acquisitions Inc? You can be a plaintiff. I don't know how I would have put that into a campaign, but I want to at one point
very
just
interesting.
be a lawyer.
You'd probably be a lawyer that kind of failed their bar exam, or
they failed the bar or something like that, or got disbarred for something.
Could still have your bar association, and you're just trapped in a difficult situation, or maybe if you're in a campaign world that is more of an investigation detective type story, then that's totally the kind of place where a character like that can shine, because then they're oh hey, I know a judge we can talk to.
Which that could work with something like the Oath of the Crown Paladin. Now the law is because one of the things is the law is paramount. So perhaps you have a Oath of the Crown Paladin. Lawyer
Joey
Paladin.
Patelli, the only lawyer who will sue himself for the injuries he causes you. He's never lost his case. Oh no.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to make this character now. I'm sorry to all the DMs out there.
So
I'm gonna make a
my only request
paladin.
is that I believe, unless I'm mistaken,
apologies,
that is one of the paladins that gets counterspell as a spell, and if you cast counterspell, you need to shout objection.
Objection. Yeah. Let me see here. The Oath of the Crown. Hold up. They get command, compelled duel. Command is a weird thing for a lawyer to get, I feel like. Zone of Truth definitely makes sense. Warding Bond, Aura of Vitality, Spirit Guardian. Oh yes, man, I've got to wonder if you're doing Spirit Guardians, is it just law books, legal books that just spin around you? Banishment.
A cease and desist.
You're not legally allowed to be on this plane of existence.
Oh gosh.
Guardian of Faith, Circle of Power, and Geish. They get Geish.
That's
That
that.
that is
Kish
not
like
something a
very
paladin should
powerful
have
spell,
access
or
to. I feel
yes,
like.
however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah. But I
That
agree with
would
you.
be
I
very
think counters.
funny.
I think instead of aura of vitality, they should have counter spell.
Exactly.
That would be. But you, like you said, you have to shout objection. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Yeah. One of our lovely chatters, Mist, has a good point. The paladin must at
Oh
least
yeah,
once
for
say,
sure.
"I am the law." Judge Dredd is 100% a crown paladin.
Um,
Like, that's why I love
So,
taking inspiration
so yeah,
from
So I did
different
create
sorts of
this
media and doing that.
aspect
But
of
yeah,
the world,
um,
and then based on the premise of the campaign, which was that magic has been gone for the last 100 years, I just kind of thought of like, what is like, okay, then what's the realistic reaction, or what reaction do I feel is, most fitting? And the idea that like the accursed became like a much worse problem because people couldn't just like curse them anymore and make them like go be normal people. Obviously it led to a lot more accursed violence, which is probably how Priscilla got her their backstory in the first place, is an unintended consequence of Wix stealing all the magic in the world. Oops.
yeah. And I love that you talk about the different campaigns and like having to kind of build a campaign, not necessarily build a campaign around, but build a mechanic around that or something. Because paladins, like we talked about earlier, because they're no longer religion-based characters, I feel like it's much easier to play them in all sorts of types of campaigns now, whether it's a high fantasy, a low fantasy, even like a high-tech campaign if you want to do it, because they're no longer bound by religion. If you're doing like a cyberpunk style campaign, obviously if you're playing Cyberpunk 2077, I'm pretty sure they don't have a paladin class, but if you're doing like a cyberpunk twist on 5e or Pathfinder or something like that, you can still find a way to incorporate that in there, because maybe they're just maybe their oath is like their
gangs,
oath to their gang or whatever, like when you take that, or like we said, even with something like Judge Dredd, if you're in this hyper futuristic setting, like, okay, they took an oath to the crown. In this case, it's not necessarily like a king, but it is an oath to the whoever is deciding what the law is in the city. You can still do that. Same thing with Oath of Glory. Like, they just want to be the best. Whatever it is, they just want to be the best at it.
Oh yeah,
I think
sure.
Oath of Vengeance very much plays in any setting.
Oh, exactly.
You're angry at something. Doesn't matter what it is. And I love that Oath of Vengeance can kind of be, and again, with a lot of these can be twisted to either being good or evil. Like, even though the Oath of Vengeance, like, one of their tenets is fight the greater evil.
Yeah, and
evil can be subjectively manipulated
certainly.
In certain circumstances, I feel like.
As far
or it can be misconstrued. Like, if somebody is bigoted against, something else, like, they might view
there
that
is
as evil,
definitely
even though
room
it's
for like
objectively not.
Interpretation.
In their view, they're
within
fighting the
oath.
greater evil.
And there is some interesting, exploration of like, how does your paladin view their oath? And certainly there isn't like necessarily as much oversight when you're playing like a non-religious paladin, because it's up to like your character's interpretation of the oh gosh, hold on, I need to close the door because the cricket.
Which, DMs, don't be afraid to hold your paladin players to their tenets, by the way, though, because I know a lot of times, like, a lot of people here, they do want to have fun, and it's very loose with the rules and very loose with things, and you want to rule it cool it, but like, if you're, again, say you're, you have an Oath of Vengeance paladin, and they've, we'll go back to, Priscilla. I don't know if they're an Oath of Vengeance Paladin, but let's say they took an Oath of Vengeance against goblins, and all of a sudden there's a goblin there, and they don't kind of, act like they normally would around a goblin because they're making metagame decisions. Not saying that Priscilla's doing that, I'm just, going on hypothetical here. Don't be afraid to, maybe temporarily be like, hey, you don't have access to your channel divinity until you reaffirm your oath by doing something, or you don't have access to, maybe your smite isn't extra, maybe you're taking a D8 away from their smite. So now they still have access to it, it's just not as powerful. Because that is one of the very good RP aspects I think of Paladins, is having these tenets that are like, hey, you're not devoting yourself to a deity, but you are devoting yourself to these tenets, and that is where your power is coming from. So you do need to follow them.
There has to be some, I mean, yes, there is definitely room for each paladin to like interpret their oath in a specific way, but. Yeah, as a DM, I don't think you should be necessarily afraid to point out how they might have contradicted these tenets.
Yeah. Like, obviously, nobody's going to be 100% consistent. We all make mistakes. We forget things. We may not, because, we may not remember exactly what all of the tenets are, because I think they have like 4 or 5 tenets that they have to follow. You may, one of them may slip through the cracks or whatever. Fine. Just remember, be like, hey, just so you remember, XYZ is one of your oaths.
Yeah,
or one of the tenets of your oath.
Yeah, and how strictly you want to play that can also play into the story. Like, definitely if it is more of a like non-religious paladin, and probably you go a little more light with the like enforcement, whereas if it is a deity, they might take it very personally that you've broken an oath with them.
They might be offended.
And
like,
also,
I gave you this power, and now
interesting
you're not
way.
following what I asked you to do.
So
I'm taking that away.
This is a little heady, and maybe doesn't work with like every single setting. But it is sort of an ancient idea that breaking a promise or an oath is bad luck. Like it visits some kind of misfortune upon you. That's why in Japan specifically, and maybe in other places, crossing your fingers is like a way to protect yourself from bad luck, which is why in cartoons and stuff you see people like cross their fingers behind their back when they make a promise that they intend to break. It's their way of guarding themselves against the bad luck of breaking a promise without the other person seeing them, obviously. Because if you're crossing your fingers right in front of the person, like, yeah, I totally trust me. I'll definitely, throw the rope down to you. It's like, why are you crossing your fingers? What? No. Like, yeah. So, a different way you could go about it, even before you get into, like, taking away their player abilities, is just to give them, like, weird bad luck. Like, that is personal to them, or, that's, like, personal to them in a way. Like, for example, if, like, part of their oath is that they, like, made a promise to protect someone or something, then maybe that someone or something ends up hurt in some way because you broke your oath. Because, this can get into a bit more fantastical territory, but it is definitely something to consider, is not to just immediately jump to taking away player abilities, but also, like, hey, yeah. So, but it is a decent way to, like, use the world.
Yeah, because you don't want to lose that sense of player agency
to affect them. Because certainly, if you're playing in a setting where a character's promise is powerful enough to grant them magical powers, that means that a promise inherently has some kind of magic to it. And so it could, it's equally possible for that magic to just affect other things, even things that you aren't directly looking at any given moment.
Yeah, and this bad luck doesn't necessarily have to be, story related.
Yeah.
It can just be like, hey, your character goes for breakfast. Their bacon is burnt.
I love that idea of like, hey, you're making breakfast one day,
their ale
and
is
you crack your egg,
their ale is
cooking,
flat.
You turn to like, go to grab some bacon. You turn back, and your eggs are horribly burned. They are blackened, charred eggs, and they're like, oh no!
Yeah.
It's because I wasn't honest enough. My eggs.
just like little things like that. Like, it doesn't be like again, like nothing that hurts the character. Like, oh, you go down,
yeah,
you're walking in town or something like that. You
yeah.
trip, you fall,
I will
you
say,
land
like,
in
that
some
is
horse
also
manure.
a very,
There's the character you're crushing on, turns the
that
corner
could
right
make
there.
for a very interesting character to act as a foil for your protagonist, because like maybe they're an Oathbreaker paladin who is constantly followed by bad luck because of the promises they broke, and they're just like a disaster of a person who either follows your character around or interacts with them. Like, going back to like the urchin background example, yeah, maybe your friend is like this Oathbreaker paladin thief who is just constantly followed by bad luck because of all of the deceit in his life.
Yeah. Yeah, things like that can definitely... And I'm glad you brought it back to like the urchin paladin, because I do want to talk about not backgrounds again, but possible multi-classes for paladin.
Again, I said my
rogue
my
is
very
definitely one of the ones that is
was a rogue
underutilized, but
favorite class
very
for
flavorful.
Sure.
Yeah, because I think something like somebody who has like several levels in rogue,
certainly,
is a professional thief and then gets caught and becomes a redemption paladin, still has like those rogue levels.
I went with a swashbuckler
in
rogue for
whatever
my,
rogue subclass
Roy Locksley,
obviously
because
would probably be these, but whatever whatever flavor.
They are a good they are a Robin Hood pirate.
Yeah.
Like they
another purple rose pirate.
An Oath of Devotion paladin, actually, because he's very dedicated to his ideals of bringing justice upon the seas and helping the poor and fighting master pirates and things like that.
Which that's not a combination that you traditionally think of when you think of the old. And again, I know we're coming back to this a lot, but the old lawful good, religious-based paladin. You don't think of rogue being. You think of cleric, obviously. Like cleric is probably the easiest connection to make. That or fight, like a cleric or fighter is probably like the easiest one to kind of like to explain away of like, oh hey, they were a fighter and then they
fairly easy
they were a
one
cleric
that I've
studying,
admittedly
and
done
they,
twice
they had to become more martial
because turns out I'm actually a hack. No, I'm joking. Is Hexblade Warlock. It's pretty easy to justify that, like, either your deity gives you... Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Warcraft Wright's the Hexblade Paladin.
Actually, Sir Dinadon...
So my guy
there's
Warcraft Wright's
two
a
different
Hexblade
flavors
Paladin.
of Hexblade Paladin with this one, because I played Sir Dinadon, who's like the legendary, chivalrous knight of Vittore. And then there's also Sergei, and Sergei's this Oath of Vengeance paladin, Hexblade, who just hates necromancers, just hates the Black Tower and everything it stands for, and just stalks outside of it, hoping to, kill whatever mage comes to, like, try to attack the nearby villages. It's like, It's like, you think you can take my family?
Yeah.
You think you can... I can't do his voice just suddenly, but he's like, you think you can take my family from me and get away with it? I will kill all of you. Like, he's just stalking the woods like a animal.
Well, listen, one of my favorite combinations that I don't think a lot of people think of is a Oath of the Ancient Paladin, which the Oath of the Ancient is very much like protecting the realm or whatever. But you can I think you can very easily turn that into protecting the planet, which
so you'd become Captain
the nature
Planet.
of it, and you can very much
you become the Captain
like
Planet Paladin
of protecting the land, of being this Paladin of. Yes, it's very much a Captain
power is mine, actually, because I made the oath.
Captain Planetid. Yeah. Like, but that's not something that I think a lot of people think of, and like that's one of those things where it's like you can kind of take what the, because that's what I want people to realize with these behind the scenes things is looking at these classes and take what the text says and then just turn it a little bit. Don't twist it and do a full 180 with it and, corrupt it. But, like, turn it a little bit. Turn it 30, 45 degrees and just look at it a little differently of what does this actually mean?
As far as, actually, like, multi-classing in general goes...
What can you flavor this as?
The Paladin is... well, it says it's, like, mad or multi-ability dependent, but really, like... either dex or strength, and then your charisma, which, it are the two main stats that you want to invest in. Yes.
Which I do love the Warlock combination, 'cause, again, with that charisma thing. And then I do love the Hexblade
that's
idea,
essentially
because,
what happened.
Maybe the Paladin finds like a cursed weapon that can help
vengeance.
them
he's like
in whatever their oath is, like, especially if it's something like Oath of Conquest.
The god of revenge gave me a magic sword to get revenge, so I got revenge with my revenge.
Whatever gives me power.
Actually, could I get 2 sides of revenge?
Yeah. Would you like a side of revenge with your revenge? But one of the things that I do love is if you are playing the kind of typical religious paladin, and then turning it into an Oathbreaker paladin, and then making a pact and becoming a different type of becoming a celestial or a fathomless archfey, whatever warlock it is. Like you can have a really big like cinematic moment where the paladin breaks their oath with their original deity and then takes up this new contract, and you can have I think for the DMs, like, you can really play into that aspect of, is this character struggling with this decision? Did they just fully and easily abandon their previous oath? How does that affect them? Does your
deity send
angry?
A paladin to come?
Are they sad, or do they want to take revenge on this character now? Yeah. Now you've got this foil or this potential BBEG that is, essentially the avatar, really the champion of your old, deity that you were a paladin of. Yeah. That's why I tell people, think, like, obviously if you're just doing like a one shot and you just want to build a strong character and you're just multi-classing just to get things, fine. But if you have an in-character reason, and I will always praise Princess K, Gamani in Tales of Vitore for having 4 classes, because every time something came up in the story for them to multi-class, they did. Yeah, it was one of the greatest things, because she ended up being Paladin. Not Paladin. No, I would say Paladin, but she wasn't. She was a barbarian, a
No,
warlock,
she
fighter.
she was a paladin.
She was a No, she wasn't a paladin because she didn't have smites. She was something else. Was she?
I thought it was, but
Can anybody in chat
it is
confirm what
paladin.
Kamani's fourth class was? Because I thought it wasn't paladin. Oh, let me see if I can pull. It is paladin.
Oh yes,
Okay.
yes.
No, sorry, no. I pulled up her character sheet. It's barbarian, fighter, warlock, rogue.
Exactly. Better than
She's a
most
rogue.
people
God.
would have.
And there were so many things for her to keep track
so,
of, and she did a wonderful job.
One other, I'll say that like when you are multi-classing a paladin, one of the other major things to consider is aura of protection, because personally speaking, it is probably my favorite ability in the entire game of D&D. Is the 6th level ability that lets you add your charisma modifier to not only your saving throws, but the saving throws of all of your any ally within 10 feet of you, which is so it is one of my is so helpful. I will say I have thought of this build before, and it does work out in terms of like the number of levels, even if it's probably not like it's so multi-ability dependent, is to go Oath of Ancients Paladin, Satyr, like we talked about, for 6 levels, and then for the other 14 you get Monk, and then get Diamond Soul, which gives you proficiency in every saving throw, and then get like a plus 11 to all saving throws with advantage.
I did. Yeah. No, I did something similar. It wasn't. It wasn't Paladin though. I don't think. I think it was. Yeah, it may have been Paladin actually, but where you're just you're proficient in everything, and then everything has just. I think the lowest thing you have is like a +10, because you have whatever your charisma score is, which is at least going to be a 14
minimum.
So you're adding at least 2, and then if you're level 20, your proficiency is 6. So now you're at a +8, like minimum. Bare minimum, you're at a +8, and then like I said, if you're a satyr, now you have advantage on that. So now you're just like you're rolling with advantage with them, and it's probably not even a +8. You're probably closer to a 10, 11, 12.
Yes. It
which is absolutely dumb.
Indeed.
But yeah, that's why I love
phenomenal.
Monk for that reason, but that's something we'll get into when we talk about the Monk class, because Monks are phenomenal. Paladins are phenomenal, and they're very versatile, and I hope we showed everybody tonight just how versatile and different Paladins can be, whether that's your choice of background, your race, any multi-classing option. You can play them in any type of environment now. Low magic, high fantasy, super techy.
Let's see.
Wherever you want.
I guess my
last Taylor, do you have any last
bit of
comments
advice
about
that I
the
would
Paladin
give
before
in
we
general
head off for the
for
night?
Paladin players is that you can find if you do ultimately want to be a more religious paladin and make that part of your character, you can certainly find the balance where everyone in your group is comfortable with however much that theme plays into your character, or not at all. It doesn't have to, like we said before, but believe me when I say that, like, you will, when you have your good group of friends, you can find the right balance with them in your party. Like, just like you don't want the rogue to be the kind of person who, like, pickpockets everyone. Not everyone's comfortable with a paladin who's very zealous, and just, you can find a nice balance with your party and with everyone, where you feel like you're not betraying your own self and what you believe, and you're not making everyone at the table uncomfortable. And yeah, play Paladins because they are really cool. Like even they're just so cool. I just love it. Yeah.
Yes, they are very cool. They're very fun.
Play your
Um,
goblin lawyer
and
paladin.
they're very, like I said, there's a lot of different ways to play them. So get out there, play a paladin. And yeah, and
Not Sparrow
tune into
specifically, but
Regnum Vertitium going forward, where hopefully we will have some paladin examples for you to listen to. You can catch us, not Sparrow specifically, but you can catch us Fridays in the Flavored Enemy Discord, or you can catch us on any streaming service, your Spotify, your Apple Play, Google Play, all that stuff, YouTube, anywhere and everywhere that there is a podcast, we are putting our content out there on. So thank you for joining us, and hop into the Discord and vote for who you want
unless
to.
we all get
what
together
class you want us to talk about 2 weeks from now.
and have me again.
Obviously, Paladin's off the list now, but hopefully we talk about a good one.
Have a good night.